very fortunate to have three fantastic speakers. We have Tadhg Buckley joining us over on my left there. Tadhg is the Chief Economist with the IFA and a former Head of Agriculture Lending with AIB. So I was particularly delighted that Tadhg was able to join us because obviously it's important to have farmer representation in these conversations, but your particular perspective on the economics of it all I think is absolutely central to the kind of discussion we need to have. If we're going to be shifting towards a sustainable model, well, how do we make that economic or a more sustainable model? To my left then we have Dr. Sean Owens, and Sean is a GP based in Dublin, I think. Dublin, is it? Oh, Dundalk, my apologies. And Sean is part of an organisation called Plant-Based Doctors Ireland. And I'm familiar, I've worked quite closely with the Irish Doctors for the Environment group, which has been extremely active on climate change, not just in raising awareness in the community, but also within the medical organisation and the College of General Practitioners. So they've played a very important role in educating themselves and everybody else, but I'm particularly interested in your perspective on the role of dietary change and nutrition and some of the debates, you know, and the kind of arguments that are made around what's possible and feasible and sustainable looking to a population of 9 billion people by 2050, and how that affects the kind of farming we need to adopt, and also what we need to do about that in Ireland, because the sense is, well, that's a global thing, but it might not change anything here. And then finally, to my left, I have Catherine Cleary, who's, I think, no stranger to the Savour Kilkenny Food Festival. I'm sure you've been here in the past as a food critic, but she made it very clear that she's a writer and journalist and also social entrepreneur, having co-founded the organisation Pocket Forests with Ash Conrad Jones, and they remove urban waste to regenerate soil and grow native trees and shrubs to help people reconnect with nature and find resilience and abundance. So maybe I'll let you kick off, Catherine, if you want to tell us a little bit about the work you're doing and your perspective generally on this conversation about food and agriculture.
Thanks, Ive. It's lovely to be here. The first thing I got when I arrived here was some beautiful hot apple juice from locally grown apples, so it really set the tone for what I think is a really positive story, food story. There are hundreds of people here, probably thousands of people here, who are looking for a food story that they want to get behind. And I think that's, as I was saying, I used to come here with a small fork and I now work with a much bigger fork in soil. I put down my small fork because I felt that while there was much to celebrate in the Irish food scene, there was also a lot of work to be done to put us on a better road where we're not going to be made obsolete, I suppose, by the kind of technology that's coming for the food system, and also, more frighteningly, the effect that some forms of farming are having on our environment. So Pocket Forest came from 2020 being locked down in the Ireland's most green-deprived neighbourhood in the south inner city. We came across an idea which was making high-rise habitat, both for humans and insects and birds. And we reckoned everything else around us was going high-rise, and if nobody else was doing this in Dublin, we would do it. So we get small bits of pretty, bits of land that nobody has really noticed for a while. Maybe somebody's been mowing it. We work with communities who live or work or go to school around it. We end up putting a lot of food waste and compost and woody materials onto the ground, trying to transition it into being a forest floor. And then we come along in bare root season, which is later than it ever is this year, again, frighteningly. We've only been doing this for 2 years, and bare root season is moving a month ahead. And we plant small areas of native trees and shrubs, and it's a delight and a joy. And I think somebody said a phrase to me last week which has stuck in my head, and I think we might write it on our whiteboard in our office, and it is contagious optimism. We are bringing contagious optimism to people, and they are absolutely loving it. And that idea of reconnecting with trees and shrubs that we've been told about when we were in primary school, but we've lost touch with, went out into the world, and that connection is still there, and we're not telling people anything they don't already know in their bones. So it's lovely to be here. I'm delighted to share the stage with Tadhg and Sean, and I'll stop talking now and hand over to Sean.
Thank you so much. My name is Sean. I work as a full-time GP just outside Dundalk. My background is actually not policy or farming or horticulture, it's actually pharmacy. And I remember finding that the whole model of community pharmacy is quite myopic, a very myopic look at health, a pill for your ill model. And that led me to transition into medicine. And I think at some point I realised not only is that not as holistic as it could be, but before we throw any stones, the healthcare system is incredibly inefficient, is incredibly consumptive. There's a waste and antibiotic and water footprint that is pretty egregious, and we don't even count the carbon emissions in healthcare. And that led me to work with Irish Doctors for the Environment, of which I'm co-chair of the Primary Care Working Group, and the Irish Society of Lifestyle Medicine, and the British Society of Lifestyle Medicine, and then of course Plant-Based Doctors Ireland. Sounds like a lot of reading in the evening, and it is, but actually they're all different sides of the same coin. Our lifestyles are incredibly consumptive. They live in this fictional world of negligible waste and limitless resources, and nature is playing catch up with us, and we're uninformed. So my work at the minute is to ask, where can we gain awareness? How can we make the changes that are needed, the swinging societal changes that are needed? And what role does active transport, what role does healthcare play? What role does our diet play? I suppose that's why I'm here today, to talk about this thing you might hear of in the current fashion of demand side or diet side demand on our natural systems. And for me, along with active transport, predominantly plant-based diets are one of the rare triple wins. A win for your health, less pressure on our ecological systems, which are diminishing under our feet, and a win for the economy, because healthier people are much better for the economy. So that's a long-winded way of saying why I'm here. And my inner voice says, what are you doing talking about food policy or food systems? So please check what I say. But I think as a healthcare professional, we're always called a higher standard and to talk about, to speak to the evidence base. So I don't think I've ever spoken to anything that is back of the envelope. It's usually about peer-reviewed evidence, and that's traditionally what we're talking about, and I hope to talk about today. Thanks, Ty.
Thanks. First of all, Sadhbh, thanks very much for the opportunity to come up today and for the invitation. And I suppose just first of all, a bit of background about myself. I'm working at the moment as Chief Economist and Director of Policy with the Irish Farmers Association. As you said previously, I was with AIB Bank, where I worked for about 20 years, a number of roles, and culminating in Head of Agriculture. I'm from a farming background. We also are from a commercial dairy farming background, and it's something that I'm still living on an active working dairy farm. So I suppose it's good to be able to come here today. I missed this morning because I only got up here just after lunchtime, so I did hear a bit of the last session, which is very interesting. Some of which, in fairness, I think was a lot of which I would agree with, some of which I would possibly have some, I challenge a small bit. But overall, though, I think that there's a lot of valid points made. And I suppose when I look at this challenge, my perspective is from Irish agriculture is, there's no doubt in my mind that Irish agriculture needs to reduce emissions. Irish agriculture needs to work to make sure that we're protecting water quality and that the trends on that are going in a positive direction rather than the challenges that it's under at the moment. But I think we've got to also base anything we're doing based on, and mentioned here, is on data. And I think that's a part of the that's often lost in the argument, and science-based argument. And I think that I would say on both sides of the fence there, side. I think from a farming perspective, some of the commentary at times I think can be can be very simplistic and can be inaccurate and can, say, well, listen, there's nothing we need to do here. We're it's not our job to work on the whole sustainability challenge in terms of emissions and water quality and that side. But I think on the other side, some of the arguments that are put forward, I think they don't stand up to scrutiny when it comes to some of the scientific developments that are going on that side. And I'm happy to get into that as we go past. So I suppose the big thing that when I look at Ireland, I mean, there's a couple of things that we've got to bear in mind. First of all, 50% of Ireland's landmass cannot grow any other crop other than grass or trees as well, but it can't grow crops. So what we have in Ireland is we have an agricultural system that's dominated by the ruminant agriculture, and that's been historically the case as well. And one of the main reasons for that is because of the nature of the country. So if you move to other countries, you don't have that you have a lot of it probably swinging directly the other way. And a lot of that is down to climatic conditions. It's actually not down to, that's the core reason a lot of them are that way. So I think that what we have to look at and say, well, we have, I mean, where I would probably differ from a lot and say, I don't believe that we should be eliminating ruminant agriculture from Ireland. Because my view is that we are very efficient at producing product from ruminant agriculture. And I do believe that from an international perspective, we are going to require these products going forward. I get the points made about maybe we should be consuming less per person, and there's an argument to be made about that. But the point is, though, that if you look at the whole direction of travel in terms of products from ruminant agriculture, dairy or beef, production of dairy and beef globally is under serious pressure. There's an awful lot across mainland Europe. Production of dairy is stagnant. Even in Ireland this year, production of dairy, milk production is more or less flat this year. It hasn't grown by anything like the pace. And I think that what we see going forward, we won't see anything like the growth that we've seen in the last 5 or 6 years in dairy. And what happened in the growth in the last 5 or 6 years was mainly as a result of the removal of quotas, which was an EU decision, not an Irish decision. But as well as that, it was driven by economic sustainability of farmers. So one of the core challenges we have in Ireland is that a huge amount of our farmers are not economically sustainable. And what I would be saying as well is, what are we doing from a policy perspective to change that? I don't see a whole point. And I think the EU, I spent some of last week, I spent 2 days in Brussels last week, and it was in Holland as well at the end, or the Netherlands at the end of the week. And what really frustrates me is when I look at, and I look at our European policymakers, and I say, well, they have a responsibility to if they want to make this happen as well, they can't just stand aside and say, well, because if you take it from a CAP perspective, the amount of funding going into CAP has reduced by 17% in real terms in Ireland since the early 2000s. So if we want to drive change, the market is not delivering that. That point was made in the last panel, and it's true. I mean, at retail levels, the market doesn't deliver premium prices for sustainability at the moment. That just doesn't happen. And like, if a market is failing like that, it should be regulated better. That's change what to do. If you've market failure, you intervene with regulation. And at last we've seen after years of the EU saying, well, we don't need to intervene, we now have an unfair trading practices directive, which will see the formation of a food regulator in Ireland for the first time in a long time, and that's positive. So I think what we've got to do and say is, well, we've got a huge challenge from the economic sustainability in Ireland in terms of farming. So we have a huge amount of farmers that are from a viability side are struggling. So when farmers are said, well, you've got to become more sustainable or whatever it is, the argument is in that tangent. It's I suppose farmers will say, well, show me how am I going to be more sustainable economically? And I think that if we're going to look at the sustainability, we have to look at it through those prisms as well. You have to look at economic and social sustainability along with environmental sustainability.
Thank you so much for that, Tadhg. I think you make some really important points there. And I suppose just to broaden out the conversation and taking on board everything you've said about the fact that many farms are not economically viable even as things stand. But the question that we were kind of trying to get to is, well, what would a sustainable food system model look like for Ireland? We can sort of leave out the rest of the world for the moment, but you know, we're suffering catastrophic biodiversity loss. We heard from Owen earlier that just 1% of our native woodlands are intact, and that we're losing hedgerows all the time. Now, this is not necessarily the fault of farmers. There are policy reasons for these losses, but the kind of extent of the crisis is something that requires urgent intervention. And I'm conscious as well that in other countries, for different reasons, they've had to reverse out of certain agricultural policies that were responsible for serious pollution and bring about changes that were very unpopular with farmers. I suppose what I'm trying to say is that we're at the point where we need to think in terms of constraints and boundaries. And of course, you know, market intervention is going to play an important role in that somewhere along the way. But that there needs to be a kind of a paradigm shift in how we think about land and food. And obviously that has to incorporate viability and economic sustainability. But just putting it back to you guys, what would a more sustainable model look like, do you think, for Ireland?
Well, I think, you know, that idea that the consumer isn't there for a sustainable Irish agriculture product is a little bit chicken and egg. The product isn't there. There is no organic butter available in any Irish supermarket, which is mind-bending when you think of the potential for a less but better dairy production. And I think Tadhg is right. Nobody is here. I'm not here saying let's end dairy farming. I'm here saying let's do less but better dairy farming, which gets the sustainable economic model for the farmer. The number of organic dairy farmers in the country are, you know, tiny, minuscule. I've probably met most of them. And they're struggling to get their product, you know, their liquid milk product is, but their liquid milk product is hugely in demand. It sells out in my local shop. Consumers are stepping up. They want to buy a product, a food product that's leaving the land in a better shape than another product, which is, unfortunately, we understand the extraction that is happening on the intensive models all around the world, not just in Ireland. And the idea that there isn't a consumer for a sustainable Irish food product is not just simply not true. The consumers are there. What we don't have is the policy supporting farmers and producers to make those. We have an industry-led commodity. A decision was made in 2015 when the quota was lifted to make commodity dairy, to make the cheapest and the most quantity. We talked about 10 billion litres. There was a rush to make more, to farm more, to push farmers into having larger herds, into using more fertilisers, into putting themselves under enormous financial strain by borrowing for a slatted shed, feeding animals. We now import 5.5 million tonnes of animal feed every year into this country. So this idea that we have a model that doesn't support, or we have a consumer model that doesn't support better, more environmentally friendly, less biodiversity destroying farming practices is simply not true. What we don't have is an industrial and an economic model at a policy level. And I feel for farmers because they are being let down by policy. On the bus down from Dublin today, it's astonishing to see what the countryside looks like at this time of the year. The fields are eaten to the bone, even though the grass is still growing. You know, it's nearly November, the grass is still growing. There isn't a blade of grass, there isn't a hedgerow, hardly a hedgerow left in its regular state with food for the birds. And this is a really unhappy picture. You know, we're given the super, and again, I think, Tadhg, you're right to talk about the retail model. Our supermarkets have a huge responsibility in this, but there is an economic, sustainable model. And in the future, when commodity dairy is being produced in labs, which it will be, it is the only economically sustainable model for Irish farming to produce a dairy product that is a beautiful product. I'm involved at the moment with the Irish Agroforestry Forum. So Tadhg was saying that we can't grow anything but grass on 50% of their land. trees as well, but trees are a crop. Trees are an incredible crop. They're also an incredible enhancement to a farm. They can solve soil compaction, they can solve drought issues, they can solve the runoff issues we have with dairy farming. And I would urge you, this podcast is going to be released at the end of the year, and I've been talking to farmers, asking them questions about how they're incorporating trees into their food production models, and it is an incredibly optimistic story. Again, contagious optimism. This is a hugely exciting time to be an Irish farmer. We're at a stage where, you know, we are not as far down the road of commodity production as other countries are. We still have nature at our back. We still, if we take one good step, nature can take 10, and farmers can be part of the solution. They can be the heroes in this, heroes and Wellingtons who are solving this. And as Sean was saying, the opportunity cost of not doing this is a double loss. He talks about the treble win of healthy diets and active mobility, but there's a double loss of not using land in the way that it should be, and the way that nature uses it. Putting back what you take out. You know, all of the natural cycles, when we start to do that, we feel better, the food we produce is healthier, our animals are healthier, the farmers are healthier. You know, there is no loss in this system. And the policies are changing to support it. We have a new forestry programme coming in the next couple of weeks, any day now. It's been very delayed. That's going to see an agroforestry premium that's extended, so farmers can start planting trees with enough room for a silage maker to move up and down between them. That's going to be a game changer. So, you know, it's not about shutting down dairy, but it is about taking a really clear-eyed look at the model and making it better for everyone.
Yeah, so I might come in. I suppose I just wanted to make a couple of points there. First of all, just on the dairy side of it, because it was something you mentioned about that the only economically sustainable dairy system is a lab-based system. Like, I fundamentally disagree with that. So just a couple of facts I would put out in it. So first of all, if we look at carbon footprint. Carbon footprint of Irish dairy is 0.95 kgs per litre of fat-corrected milk today. That is less than half the international average. That's based on peer-reviewed data that has been published. Second of all, you look at second of all, you look at water usage. So blue water usage, which is basically the measurement from an irrigation, you know, what you take from groundwater. For a litre of milk, Irish milk, it's 6 litres. That figure for, take Holland, 60 litres, you go to the US, it's 70 something litres to produce a litre of milk. And even if you look at, say, some of the almond milk, for instance, the water usage will be per litre of milk is higher again. So, I mean, the point is very well made about the biodiversity challenge. And if we look again at the EU policy, so farmers, dairy farmers, not just dairy farmers, all grass-based farmers, if you allowed encroachment of hedgerows or anything like that, if you had basically, if you allowed encroachment or say rush build-up of rushes in your land, you were fined up to this year. So, yeah, so thankfully that's been changed now, which is a massive positive. So, and now you can have a situation where you can have up to have 30% of your land parcels can be based on habitat based, and you still get paid for it, which is again a change. So, I mean, in terms of the removal of the biodiversity side, that's going to be a huge game changer. So, in terms of this, just another thing on space for nature. So, we're mapping all the countries, all being mapped at the moment in space for nature. The figure is expected to come in around 13%. Nationally, space for nature for in terms of land. If you go and you look at, say, international research on that, the figures, say, for mainland Europe, it's significantly lower than that. There was 2 studies, one done in France, one done in Poland. Those figures were way lower than the Irish figure. So again, it's about like, I would think that what we have to do here is we need to have, first of all, we need to properly, so if you take on the biodiversity, we've never done a national study on that has mapped the entire country in terms of biodiversity. It has never been done in Ireland, which is, when you think about it, it's ridiculous. Like, we need to be, first of all, making sure that we have proper research done, again, similar to the carbon sequestration, which has never been done in Ireland. It's been done now to try and understand what's happening from a carbon sequestration perspective. And again, when we get that, then we can better understand what's going on and better address it. And it's not to say that, I'm not saying no that we don't need to do more. I'm saying is that I think that we've got to be realistic too, and say, well, what's the proper and most appropriate actions to take.
No, I mean, very good points made. Speaking to what I know about, within a sustainable food system, there is a sustainable diet. That's quite easy. That's a predominantly plant-based diet. That's our own food pyramid. The bottom shelf is whole grains and fruits and vegetables. There's a meat shelf, yes. But that's as per UN, as per IPCC, as per Eat Lancet, FAO. You can take your pick. How much meat and dairy would be included in that is up for debate, I guess. Of interest, when some countries create their food pyramids but they exclude industry lobby from that process, dairy seems to disappear from that programme, because it's very questionable whether you need it for health. Meat and dairy are nutritious by definition, they contain nutrients, but do you need it for health? In terms of nutritional epidemiology, it's always a case of swaps, but what compared to what? So there's no shortage of evidence to say that dairy is very healthy for gut health. It's questionable whether it's good for prostate health. Red meat is it harmful for your heart? Well, it depends how much. But there is a commonality that a sustainable diet is one that is also healthy. And that's something that we can all achieve, which is kind of something that I'm more interested in, because, as I said to Catherine, we haven't achieved the rest of the SDGs. We see it in the corner there, social equality and so forth. A sustainable food system is much more difficult. And I think what we need to be informed with here is the context. And you alluded to it there in the last talk side, things are so far gone. A couple of reports by Rockstrom and Menton, one about 3 years ago called Climate Tipping Points, 2 Risky to Bet Against. And then again last summer. I think everyone in this room will probably live through a summer without any Arctic ice. I mean, that's devastating. We've already seen flickers from the coral reef that's completely bleached out with carbon dioxide. And of course, 90% of all marine life is in coral reefs. And even here in Ireland, we're not protected. We've seen with Ophelia, we've seen with Brexit, with COVID, and of course with Ukraine now, we're incredibly exposed. We do not have a resilient food system here. I think a sustainable food system, as an island nation, I don't think we can be self-sufficient, but we could be certainly more resilient. And with the 50% of Ireland that can grow arable and tillage and horticulture, I think that should be something that's nurtured and protected and paid for. We've seen with COVID, health took a lead and said, well, really, our fragile health system can't deal with a deluge. Just this year, we had a third of Pakistan completely displaced overnight. What I'm saying is, this will come to our shores soon. And with 600 people on hospital trolleys now, we are in no shape for it at all. So I think the context is we are far gone down the road of climate change, and we need swinging societal changes now. And what I hear from Ty is exciting technologies, but I feel that it's a lot of business as usual with extras, and there are a lot of unproved technologies. Incidentally, healthcare, again, can't throw stones. We're forever selling therapies that would cost your arm and a leg, and they're unproven, and in the cold light of day, they add of little value. So I would be very wary of us planning on meeting our climate ambitions with technologies that are in effect a punt. A sustainable health system is one that is equitable, it is one that is fair, and it's one that's healthy, and I think it's one that's achievable. I hope so anyway.
I think there's some very good points raised there. Now, first of all, I wouldn't. I think what you said about the tillage sector is a very valid point, and we do have to make sure that we can have we continue to nurture the tillage sector. That's absolutely vital. I mean, this year was one of the first year in a while that the crop area in Ireland is actually growing. I suppose a couple of things as well. And this is, if you look at, say, we mentioned about crops, so something I meant to say earlier. If you look at, say, biodiversity, you look at the GLAS scheme that was brought in. The GLAS scheme was an environmental scheme, some people know. So in 2020, there was 20,000 hectares of wild bird cover planted in Ireland. And that was actually 2.5 times the amount of land that grew potatoes. And that's an example of where you can put in place a scheme that encourages improvements of biodiversity, and then farmers will follow and will act, because it's a double whammy, because there's an economic benefit to it and there's an environmental benefit to it. So I suppose just on the whole climate change side of it, I have an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old at home, 2 girls. So climate change is real. You can see it's happening, and it absolutely concerns me. So what we need to do on the climate change side, what really worries me about climate change as well, is the whole focus on livestock agriculture as the core problem of climate change. And I think if we are sleepwalking ourselves into a huge problem if we keep doing that at the expense of the fossil fuel industry. So if we look at the ruminant agriculture and we look at what we need to do. So from under Food Vision 2030, the targets were reduce biogenic methane by 10%, so reduce the methane from agriculture by 10%, and reduce fertiliser by 20%. And that is now going to be likely to be increased now, because I'm part of the Dairy Food Vision Group at the moment. And so if we look at what is the roadmap going to look like not many of them are based actually on unproven technologies, to be honest with you. So what we need to do, we need to reduce the amount of fertiliser we're using. Absolutely. It's back probably 15% this year, and that's going to reduce by more, because using multi-species swards, stuff like that, which has already started, is going to help. And using slurry better, like using low-emission slurry spreading, which has gone from 4% in 2017 to 67% in 2021 on dairy farms, will make a big difference. Second of all, we have to reduce methane. And what we can do on that is there's 2 ways of doing that. There is breeding lower methane animals, which we will do, and we already have a program in place there. The largest methane capture research facility in the world is in Kildare, an hour up the road, run by the Irish Cattle Breeding Federation in Tully. At the moment, the largest. So a lot of research is going in to understand how much methane is coming from different types of animals, and then breed lower methane animals. We can do that. We're already well on the way to doing that. The feed additive side of it is the part, I suppose, in fairness, where the technology is. It's not that it's not proven. It's not proven in a grass-based setting, but there is research now that shows that it has about maybe 1/3 of the efficacy that it has in an indoor system currently, how it's designed, and there is more research trying to get a grass-based additive working there. So if you were looking at it in terms of from a research perspective, it looks like we will find some sort of solution there, and then that allows us. So that's another option, absolutely. But I mean, we believe that we can achieve what we need to achieve without going that route. What I said is that if we look at what we want to do in terms of trying to achieve our reducing our emissions, there is solutions there that we can do it without necessarily reverting to reducing national herd. There's a roadmap that we are developing there that will potentially deliver that without having to reduce the national herd.
Thanks, Tadhg. And a lot of what you're saying there is really encouraging, and it's fantastic to see so much progress implementing those measures. They have been around for a while. I just wanted to bring in one point that's important. You mentioned that there's too much focus on agriculture, but in fact 75% emission reduction target was set for the electricity sector alone, and we all use electricity, we all rely on it, and that's going to be extremely difficult to achieve because we're burning more coal now as a result of what's happened in Ukraine and the gas prices. So the target for the electricity sector is absolutely onerous and might not be met. The target for transport is 50% and for buildings, and we're looking at a 25% emission reduction target for agriculture. So if there's a focus on agriculture, it's because there is a sense that it might not be taking its share of the burden. And can I just make one additional point about climate and emissions, because this is where it deviates a little bit from the land and biodiversity. So with regard to climate change, it's a global atmospheric problem. So emissions from anywhere in the world are creating a problem for the whole Earth system. So it doesn't really matter where the emission reductions come from, in theory. They could come from China, they could come from the US, they could come from Ireland. It's a political decision to share the burden in the way that it has been designed under the Paris Agreement. It's an entirely political decision, but that's different from how you decide to manage your own territorial resources, your land, your forests, your rivers, your lakes, and so on. So we have to, on the one hand, respect the natural planetary boundaries, if you like, insofar as they exist at home on our land in Ireland, but we also have to make a commitment to taking on this global problem of acting on climate change. And the only reason I'm saying this is just that it's very difficult to design policy solutions that address everything all at once. But the important thing is that the contribution Ireland makes to greenhouse gases and global warming is a political and legally binding commitment we have made under the Paris Agreement. And good luck to any government trying to reverse out of that.
Sorry, apologies. When I said about the focus on agriculture, I meant at an international level rather than an Irish level, in terms of because I get the point is very well made about the targets that energy got and transport got relative to agriculture in Ireland. So I suppose one of the things that, and again, when we start talking about this, straight away, a lot of people say, well, you're trying to get out of you're trying to buy yourself a get out of jail free card. What I'm talking about is the whole principle around the warming side of it, and that if we wanted to try and address climate change tomorrow morning. So one of the lot of research that I have been looking at recently has been from Miles Allen in a professor in Oxford University. So, and he's not necessarily an advocate at all for agriculture, I suppose, but he's very much at the forefront of the research on methane. And I suppose the point that he makes, and I think it's a very valid one, if you want to solve it in the morning, you basically what you need to happen is you need to reduce methane from agriculture, has to stop increasing, and needs to reduce by a minimum of 3% per decade. And what you also have to do at the same time is you have to stop emitting from fossil fuels. They have to happen together. And the concern I have...
They are happening together. I mean, Ukraine is pushing... Renewables are now cheaper than fossil fuels, and that's a tipping point which will see the energy sector and fossil fuels become part of our history. So for farming to say, well, what about fossil fuels? It is a bit of what about, Tadhg.
But if we reduce methane, if agriculture reduces methane by 3% per decade, we are having no warming effect on at all. That's internationally, and I mean this is Miles Allen was on the IPCC in the previous round. I mean he's not someone that's talking. So the point is, you're absolutely right. The fossil fuel, we need to transition out of it, and it's happening. But what we need to do with agriculture.